3 years. That's how long he believed his twin daughters were gone lost to a world that swallowed them whole. But one day, on a dusty bus cutting through the endless plains, he heard their voices, singing, laughing, alive. What he didn't know yet was that the truth waiting for him wasn't just a surprise, it was a shattering blow that would break his heart and his entire world before the story even began. Wherever you're watching this video from, drop a comment below and let us know. And if stories like this move you, don't forget to subscribe and join the family. Now, lean in. The story is about to begin. The first thing I saw was blood on the rail. Not mine, not yet, but the kind of blood that tells you it ain't done leaking. I had just stepped out to check the trap's simple, daily routine in a life that had become nothing but routines when I noticed the smear across the top beam of my fence. Crimson, fresh, running downward in slow, sticky trails like it still hadn't decided whether to fight or fall. Then I saw her, barefoot, torn dress, eyes like thunder about to break. She wasn't moving much, just clutching the fence post with both arms like if she let go, the earth itself might swallow her whole. Her legs shook under her, face half covered in mud, but the bruises were clear enough. At first, I thought she was a ghost. Then she coughed. I didn't speak, didn't move. Hell, I didn't even breathe. Not at first. I just watched her try to steady herself like a fawn learning how to stand. But there was nothing innocent about the fear in her eyes. That was grown folk fear. The kind you don't learn from books or thunderstorms. The kind someone taught her rough, personal, unforgiving. And when she finally looked at me, I swear something deep inside me cracked. Because I'd seen those eyes before. Not hers. Someone else's. Someone I lost 13 years ago. I took a step forward. She flinched like I'd raised a hand. That told me everything I needed to know. I got her inside. Didn't ask questions. Just wrapped her in the old buffalo blanket I kept near the stove and gave her water. She was shaking so bad she couldn't hold the cup. I held it for her. She drank like she'd never tasted water in her life. She didn't say her name. Didn't need to. I wasn't ready for names anyway. Out here in the Bighorn foothills, I hadn't seen a soul in nearly 5 months. That was the point. I chose this life, or maybe it chose me. Either way, the silence had become a part of me. The sound of boots on wood, wind on canvas, the occasional elk call, that was all I ever heard. I hadn't spoken to a living person since the winter broke. And now this girl was bleeding on my floor. She passed out within the hour. He didn't sleep. Just sat there, rifle across my knees, staring out the window like something in the dark might try to follow her in. And sure enough, come morning, it did. I saw them from the ridge. 4 men, all on horseback. Not ranch hands or cowboys. These were the other kind. The kind that don't tip hats or say, ma'am. One of them had a bullwhip hanging from his saddle. Another, a rifle strapped across his back with the barrel wrapped in leather meant to muffle sound. These men weren't looking for a lost daughter. They were hunting cargo. They rode past the house slow, real slow, eyes scanning everything like predators who've done this 1,000 times. But they didn't come up the trail. Not yet. Just circled the outer edge and moved west, following some tracks I'd purposely covered. They'd be back, though. I could feel it. I looked at the girl again. She was asleep, still breathing, barely, face peaceful like the storm had passed, but I knew better. Storms like hers don't end, they just pause to reload. She came to just after dusk, sat up gasping, eyes wide, wild. I calmed her best I could, told her she was safe, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. Her lips trembled when she spoke, and the first thing she said wasn't her name. It was worse. They own me. 3 words. 3 nails in the coffin of my peace. She told me bits and pieces between coughs. Something about a man named Ryland, a buyer. Another man who ran the operation from a barn that was never a barn. Auction nights, she called them. Said she escaped when a drunk guard left a side door unlatched, and the dogs were too busy eating scraps to bark. I asked her where she came from. She said she didn't know anymore. And then she said a name I hadn't heard in 13 years. Claire. Claire was with me. I felt my blood turn to gravel. Claire Whitlow. That name belonged to a girl who disappeared the same summer as my daughter. Town said she ran off with some drifter, but her ma never believed that. Neither did I. Now this girl, this scared, broken creature curled up in my cabin was telling me Claire was alive? Or at least had been. That's when the silence I'd built for over a decade started to crack. I sat outside that night, pipe cold in my hand, staring up at stars I'd stopped naming years ago. Something in my chest felt different. Not hope. Not yet. But something that had once been hope. Maybe guilt grown restless. I thought of my daughter. Thought of the way she laughed in the spring when the rivers ran full, how she carved her initials into the porch beam with a rusted spoon. Her name was Elsie. She vanished 13 years ago, right after her 14th birthday. We searched for 2 months. I buried the birthday cake under the big pine out back. I never really came back from that summer. So now here I was, staring down the start of something dark. 4 riders hunting a girl, a name from the past, a place I needed to see for myself. A ring organized, vicious, silent, and me? I was just an old man with a rifle and a lot of ghosts. But sometimes ghosts are enough. Because the moment I heard that name, I knew I wasn't letting this one pass. There's an old road west of my land folks don't ride anymore. Used to be a mail trail back in the days when letters were worth their weight in risk. These days, it's nothing but cracked stone and whispers. No maps show it, no stagecoach dares it. But if you're running from the law or hunting ghosts, that's the path you take. That's the road I rode that morning. I left her a note. Told her not to open the door unless she heard me call her name. Left her my spare revolver, though I wasn't sure she had the strength to hold it, much less fire. But it was something, and something was more than nothing. I packed light. Water, jerky, ammunition, wore my old duster, the one that still stank of sweat and gun oil from another life. Slipped my father's knife in my boot, same way I had the night Elsie disappeared. Then I saddled Red and turned toward the sun. The wind was sharp that day, dry, mean. It cut across the valley like it had somewhere to be. Every few miles I'd see buzzards circling. That never meant anything good. Some folks call it nature. I call it warning. I wasn't chasing shadows. Not this time. The men who'd passed my land the day before left a trail even a blind man could follow. Broken brush, cigarette butts, a piece of leather thong caught on a thorn. They weren't careful. That told me they didn't fear being followed. I knew better. Men like that don't fear much because they've never had a reason to. But I wasn't a reason. Not yet. It took 6 hours to reach the ridge. From up top, I saw it. A ranch, if you could call it that. Fenced poorly, overgrown with weeds, looked abandoned at first glance. But the closer I glassed it with my scope, the clearer it became. Movement near the barn. Smoke rising in a thin coil from behind the main house. Horses tied under a lean-to, but no riders in sight. That's when I saw the wagon. Same one that girl described. Covered canvas, rear latch half hanging off. Blood smeared on the wooden slats near the axle. Not fresh, but not old either. The kind that hadn't had time to darken. I stayed there on the ridge for hours, watching. And what I saw confirmed what my gut had been screaming. There was a system here. Men came and went in pairs, never alone. Like clockwork, they did rounds, switched shifts, drank from the same tin cups like soldiers on assignment. But this wasn't military. This was something filthier. Organized like a business, but built on bones. And then, just before nightfall, I saw the girl. Not the one from my porch. A different one. Younger. Maybe 12. Barefoot like the other. She was carrying a metal pail toward the back of the barn. She moved slow, shoulders hunched, like she'd been taught not to take up space. She wasn't guarded. She wasn't chained. But she might as well have been. Because fear does the work of 50 locks. I slept rough that night under a bluff 2 miles south, wrapped in my saddle blanket, rifle across my chest. Coyotes howled, but they sounded more like women crying than animals. I'd forgotten how those nights could feel. Like the dark itself was pressing in, trying to choke you with memories you buried too shallow. Elsie would have been 27 this year. I still remember the last time I held her. Her hair smelled like wildflowers and wood smoke. She was always climbing trees she had no business climbing, always chasing things bigger than herself. They said she ran off, but maybe she was taken, just like these girls. Maybe I spent 13 years blaming the wrong thing. Maybe the world hadn't taken her. Maybe men had. At dawn, I made my move. Didn't ride. Didn't risk being heard. I crept low through the dry wash south of the barn and used the rising sun to keep shadows off my back. Got within 100 yards before I had to stop too exposed. That's when I heard it. Laughter. Low. Guttural. Not the kind from joy, the kind from cruelty. 2 men sat outside the barn, playing cards on an upturned crate. One chewed tobacco like it was his only hobby. The other had a scar so deep across his neck, it looked like someone had tried to shut him up for good and failed. They were joking about something to do with auction day coming early. My stomach turned. Auction day. This wasn't just abduction. This was commerce. These girls weren't being hidden. They were being sold. I stayed in that wash until sundown, marked every patrol, every guard shift, noted who drank too much and who fell asleep on watch. My hands itched to pull the trigger more than once, but I knew better. One shot too soon, and the whole operation vanishes like smoke. No, I needed more. Proof. A name, a face, something I could take to someone who'd listen. But out here, lawmen are in short supply, and those that exist have long memories. Memories of me. I rode through the night to Carter's Bluff, 20 miles east. Town barely had a saloon left, but the marshal still kept an office, or so I'd heard. Marshal Emmett Ray. A man with a badge and a conscience. 2 things that rarely survive together. He didn't recognize me at first. Then he did. The silence between us could have buried 10 men. But when I laid out what I saw, when I spoke the words, like poison leaving my mouth, something shifted behind his eyes. I told him about the ranch, the guards, the wagon, the girl, everything. I even told him about the one on my floor. He didn't interrupt, didn't nod, just listened. And when I finished, he asked one question. You sure? I nodded. Sure enough to die for it. We rode out with 4 deputies and a prayer. Quiet. Low. Lanterns out. Guns oiled. I didn't know what we'd find. I didn't know if the place would still be there. But I knew one thing. If it was, I wasn't riding back until I'd seen what was inside that barn. Because sometimes justice isn't about courts or judges. Sometimes it's just a man deciding enough is enough. And that night, I was that man. You can tell a lot about a man by the way he holds his weapon when he thinks no one's watching. Some clutch it like salvation, others like revenge. That night, riding beside Marshal Ray and his men, I didn't hold my rifle either way. I just held it because I knew I'd need it. The moon was a thin sliver, barely enough light to see the trail ahead, but more than I wanted. I'd have preferred darkness. The kind you can hide in, the kind the guilty cling to. By the time we reached the ridge overlooking the ranch, my heart was beating a slow, deliberate rhythm. Not fear, not quite. Just pressure, like something pressing down on my soul, reminding me this was real. This was happening. Marshal Ray knelt beside me behind the rocks. Same place you saw him? He asked, barely above a whisper. I nodded. And same kind of quiet. The place looked still, peaceful even. But peace can be a liar. We watched for 20 minutes. No movement, no guards, no smoke. Then, something shifted. One of the barn doors creaked open, just enough for a figure to slip out. A girl? Small, maybe 10 or 11. She crouched low, barefoot, and crawled toward a broken fence post. She reached for something, maybe food, maybe freedom. Then the door slammed open again, and a man stormed out after her. He didn't shout. He didn't run. He just walked up behind her and grabbed her by the hair, dragged her back like luggage. She didn't scream, not once. That silence, God help me, it was worse than any sound. Ray turned to me. We go now, he said. And we did. The descent from the ridge was fast and brutal. Dry brush cracked under boots, hooves bit dirt, and every heartbeat felt like it echoed off the canyon walls. We split into 3 groups. Ray and 2 men hit the barn. I took the back of the house with Deputy Martin, a young kid with too much shine in his eyes. We kicked in the rear door, found 2 men asleep at a table, drunk, unarmed. They didn't get a chance to stand. Then we heard the shot. 1 single shot. Then screaming. From the barn. We ran. The scene inside was chaos. Girls 12, maybe more, scrambling, crying, coughing from the dust, kicked up. One of the deputies had been shot in the leg. One of the slavers was already face down in the hay, blood pooling around his ear. Another was still fighting, big, red-bearded, teeth bared like a rabid animal. Ray tackled him from behind, and I swear I saw something in the marshal's face I hadn't seen before. Rage. Not duty. Rage. They fought hard, knocking over crates, kicking up straw. I raised my rifle to help, but before I could pull the trigger, the girl from earlier, the one who'd crawled out, picked up a broken pitchfork and drove it into the man's back. He howled, then dropped. Ray looked at her like she was something holy and cursed at the same time. She dropped the fork and started shaking. I wrapped my coat around her and led her out. We found them in the cellar. 4 more girls, all of them young, all of them sick with fear. One couldn't stand. Another kept whispering, "Don't take me, don't take me," over and over until she passed out. We carried them out one by one. That barn wasn't just a holding pen. It was a warehouse for the broken. Inside the rafters, carved into one of the beams, someone had scratched words with a nail. Ruth was here. Please find Mama. Ifad Muleg's Bukla. Not because of the name, but because of the plea. By dawn, we had 9 men in irons, 1 dead, 1 dying, and 13 girls alive. Not well, not whole, but breathing. The youngest was 8. The oldest said she was 16, but she looked no older than 12. We made camp just north of the ridge, laid out blankets, fed them, gave them water. Ray rode ahead to get wagons and medical help. And just I sat on a log with my head in my hands and tried not to scream. Because what I saw in that barn, what I smelled, what I heard was proof of everything I'd feared for 13 years. This wasn't new. This wasn't isolated. This was a system, a pipeline, a trade. And I had let it live, because I'd been too afraid to dig. That night, one of the girls came to sit beside me. Didn't speak for a long time. Just sat, her knees pulled to her chest, staring at the fire like she'd never seen one before. Then she asked, "Did you find your daughter?" And I didn't know what to say. So I just said, "No, but I might have found her ghost." She nodded like she understood. Maybe she did. Maybe they all did. Because every one of them had lost someone, even if it was just themselves. We rode back to town 3 days later. Took longer because of the wounded. Word spread fast. Folks came out to see, not out of kindness, but curiosity. That brand of small-town sickness that feeds off others' tragedies. But a few people cried. A few brought bread and blankets. And when June saw us riding me in front, 13 girls behind, she started sobbing so hard she couldn't stand. I carried her back inside. She wasn't safe yet. None of them were. Because Ryland, the man behind all this, was still out there. And I had a feeling this barn was just one branch of his tree. That night, I sat on the porch with June sleeping inside, and the stars burning cold above. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a man who had arrived 10 years too late. But still, he had arrived. Maybe that counted for something. There's a sound fire makes when it takes something you love. It's not the crackle, not the roar, not even the collapse. It's the silence that comes after. The kind that steals your breath. The kind that makes you forget what hope used to feel like. That's what I heard standing in front of Martha's ashes. No screams, no sirens, no mourning, just smoke and silence. June was gone. The sheriff said it was a lightning strike. The preacher said it was God's will. And Ray, he said it was war. But I didn't care what any of them said. I only cared who lit the match. I buried what was left of Martha on the North Hill. Did it myself. No service, no crowd. Just her name on a small wooden cross and a whisper of thanks for watching over the girl. Then I rode, not into the wind, not toward the sun. I followed the track's hoofprints, wagon ruts, the faint smell of smoke and oil leading west. I didn't eat, I didn't sleep, because rage doesn't sleep. It burns. The trail took me past Dry Creek, through Sable Canyon, and over Devil's Spine Ridge. 3 towns in 2 days. In each one, I asked one question. Who's buying, girls? Most folks wouldn't answer. Some lied. One man tried to draw on me. I left him with a broken jaw and a message carved into his bar. I'm coming. Eventually, a gambler in Sweetwater gave me a name. Not Ryland. Not Tate. Nils Durant. Fancy clothes, silver tongue. Called himself an agent. Owned a riverboat parked off the eastern edge of the Missouri, just beyond territory lines. A floating palace full of music, smoke, and slaves. They said Durant had been moving girls for years, mostly for Ryland, sometimes for his own little empire. Always well paid, always protected. And word was, he had a new one on board. Small, quiet, dark hair, limp in her step. I found the riverboat 2 nights later, lit up like a goddamn cathedral. Women in feathers, men in coats worth more than my horse, laughter drifting across the water like perfume, and underneath it all, the soft thud of chains and profit. They called it the Lily. I called it a cage. He didn't sneak aboard. I walked up the plank, wide and slow, coat open, rifle in plain sight. No one stopped me. Guess they thought I was just another buyer. Inside, it was velvet and brass and lies. Smoke curled from golden pipes. Cards shuffled behind silk curtains. Girls moved like shadows in tight dresses, smiling with dead eyes. And at the far end of the gambling floor, Durant. Hair slicked back. Eyes like wet glass. Rings on every finger. Sitting behind a table full of chips and blood money. He looked at me like I was just another drunk, then smiled. Play a hand, stranger, he said. I sat down. We played 5 hands. I won the first. He won the next 3. The 5th never finished, because I leaned in and said, Where's the girl? He blinked, paused, then tried to laugh, but he didn't. I pulled my revolver, placed it on the table, and said louder, The girl, Durant. The one you took from Carter's Bluff. Now the room was quiet. Cards dropped. Smoke froze midair. Men shifted. Women disappeared into walls. Durant still smiled. You have no idea what you're doing, he said. I do, I said. I'm starting a fire. Then all hell broke loose. The first bullet hit the chandelier. The second took out Durant's shoulder. I didn't stop to watch him fall. I vaulted the table, shoved through curtains, and kicked open doors until I found the lower decks. And there, locked in a room with no windows, was June. Eyes wide, mouth gagged, hands bound, but alive. I carried her out as the boat burned. Didn't even look back when the flames reached the ballroom. Let it all burn. We rode all night. She didn't speak, not at first. She just held on to me like I was the last solid thing in a world made of smoke. When she finally did talk, it wasn't about the boat, or the men, or even what they'd done. She just whispered, Don't leave me again. And I swore I wouldn't. Not until this was finished. Back in Carter's Bluff, the wind had shifted. The people who once looked away were starting to stare. Names were being whispered, men in town connected to Ryland, landowners who leased to his men, traders who sold him supplies. Ray was working day and night, building a case big enough to make the capital blink. But it wasn't enough. Ryland was still out there, still moving pieces, still untouched. And the more I dug, the clearer it became. To stop the machine, I had to kill the engine. Ryland didn't hide in shadows. He hid in plain sight, surrounded by law, money, and blood oaths. And if I wanted to reach him, I needed to go deeper than I ever had before. June stood beside me that morning as I packed the saddlebags. She wore boots now, carried a knife. Her limp was nearly gone. "I'm coming with you," she said. I looked at her, really looked. She wasn't the same girl I'd found in the woods. And maybe I wasn't the same man. "No," I said. "You're staying." Her eyes narrowed. "You promised." "I did, and I will keep it. That means finishing this without you getting killed." Silence again, like fire waiting for fuel. Then she nodded. "Once, and I rode west. They say revenge is a path with no end, but that's a lie too. Because I saw the end. It was waiting for me. Behind gold doors, beyond bloodlines. Inside the last house, on the last hill, where evil wore a suit and smiled with clean hands. They say evil doesn't always come with blood on its hands. Sometimes it wears polished boots. Sometimes it signs checks. Sometimes it smiles. And sometimes, just sometimes, it waits in a leather chair, sipping aged whiskey, while others burn villages in its name. That's how I knew I was getting close to Ryland. He wasn't hiding in the woods like an outlaw. He wasn't crouched behind a barricade like a soldier. He was sitting in a goddamn mansion on the West Hill, with a library larger than the Carter schoolhouse and enough security to stop a cavalry charge. I rode straight past the last checkpoint and up the winding trail that led to his estate. Didn't stop to lie. Didn't come to beg. I came to see the man who took everything. The gates were open when I arrived. Not unlocked open, as if they'd been expecting me. 2 guards in white suits stood on the steps. Neither reached for a weapon. "Mr. Ryland is ready for you," one of them said, almost politely. I didn't answer. Didn't need to. The house spoke for itself. White pillars, marble floors, gold-plated doorknobs, and not a speck of dust in sight. Clean, too clean. They took me through 3 long corridors and into a room that felt more like a courtroom than a study. Tall ceilings, oil paintings, shelves of books I doubted anyone had ever read. And there he was, Ryland. Gray suit, silver hair, thin smile, sitting behind a desk made of black walnut, tapping one finger slowly against the armrest. He looked up at me like I was some tired animal that had finally come home. "I wondered when you'd come," he said. His voice didn't match his face. It was soft, low, almost fatherly. "I came to bury you," I said. He smiled again, but he didn't flinch, didn't blink. He simply gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit, or shoot. Either way, let's not pretend this ends quickly." He didn't sit. "Where's the girl?" I asked. "She's safe," he said. I stepped closer. She was kidnapped. Sold. Burned out of her home. That doesn't feel very safe to me. "She was rescued." "By you?" he said, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey. "A powerful story. A good distraction." I didn't touch the glass. He slid toward me. "Distraction from what?" I asked. Ryland leaned back. "From the truth. From the fact that the world you thought you knew, this town, your neighbors, your laws, has always been built on men like me." He wasn't wrong. "But that didn't make him right," he went on, calm, cold, dead behind the eyes. "You think you're a hero," he said. "You're not. You're just a man who lost something, and you want someone to pay." "Damn right," I said. "But it won't change a thing," he replied. "Even if you kill me, someone else will take my place. Durant had 12 clients. I have 100. The machine doesn't stop because one wheel breaks." I stared at him, then said, "Then I'll break every goddamn wheel." His guards flinched, but Ryland didn't. Instead, he did something that froze me cold. He pulled open the top drawer of his desk and laid down a folded photograph of me. Younger, 10 years back, wearing a cavalry uniform, standing beside a man with eyes just like mine. "My father." "You really don't know who you are, do you?" Ryland said. I didn't answer, because suddenly I wasn't sure. He went on. Your father was my partner. Before he died, he worked for me. Built the roads, ran the mines, handled the rail lines. He even helped draft the first charter of this town. I shook my head. You're lying. Am I? He said. He believed in order, in structure. He believed in what we were building. He tapped the photo once more. You come from this. It hit me like a bullet to the spine. All the things I'd hated, all the things I'd fought, were carved into my bloodline. I staggered back. Just a step. Just enough for Ryland to see it. And that was the only time he showed his teeth. Hedvon. Or so he thought. But there's something men like him never understand. Blood is not destiny. I may have come from rot, but I wasn't going to rot with it. So I raised my revolver, aimed it at the head of the machine, and fired. Click. Nothing. Another click. Still nothing. My gun had been emptied. Sometime, somewhere, I hadn't checked. And Ryland had known, because he leaned forward, smooth as oil, and whispered, You're not here to kill me. You're here to see who you are. I could have lunged, could have torn at his throat with my hands. But before I moved, a noise behind me. Footsteps. Light ones. Small ones. June. She stepped into the room, holding something I hadn't seen her touch in days, her old hunting knife. She stood between me and Ryland. Silent. Steady. He looked at her, almost amused. Then said, You've already lost. And she replied, So have you. Then she did what I hadn't been able to do. She threw the knife. It struck true, right below the collarbone, deep. Ryland collapsed. He didn't scream. He didn't beg. He just bled. Slow, quiet, almost peacefully. The man who ran empires, silenced by a girl he tried to erase. We didn't wait for the guards. Didn't wait for justice. We walked out the front door, past the white pillars, past the polished marble, past everything he'd built. And we didn't look back, because some ghosts don't deserve remembrance. Back in town, Ray was waiting. We told him what happened. He didn't ask for proof. He just nodded and said, The machine's still turning, but it's missing a piece now. We left the next morning. Didn't pack much. Didn't say goodbye. Because we weren't running. We were choosing to walk forward. Choosing to heal. Choosing to live with the scars but not be owned by them. And as we rode out of Carter's Bluff, June turned to me and said, What now? I looked ahead, toward the horizon, toward whatever came next, and answered, Now we write our own story. They say when you kill the devil, the fire doesn't go out. It just spreads. Ryland died in silence, but his empire didn't. Word traveled faster than a bullet. Within 2 days, the entire Western Territory knew the man on the hill was gone, and not just gone, bled out by the hands of a native girl and an ex-cavalry ghost. That kind of story stirs the wrong hearts. The kind that used to depend on Ryland's coin. The kind that missed the leash around their necks. At first, it was just whispers, murmurs in taverns, nervous glances at the train stations. But by the 4th day, the machines started to groan. Supply lines vanished. Letters stopped arriving. Men with quiet eyes and loud guns began appearing in towns that didn't ask for them. They weren't soldiers. They weren't bandits. They were something in between orphans of a dead kingdom, trying to stitch it back together with iron and fear. We didn't stay in Carter's Bluff. It wasn't our home anymore. We rode south me June, and Ray keeping to back roads, sleeping beneath the open sky, listening for the tremble of distant hooves behind us. But no matter how far we rode, we couldn't outrun it. The fire was everywhere, and every town we passed through had the same question burning in their eyes. What happens now that Ryland's gone? There's something no one tells you about killing a king. The crown doesn't vanish. It just rolls away, waiting for the next fool to pick it up. And one finally did. His name was Harmon Cole, a rancher, a preacher, a bastard in fine boots. He used to be Ryland's right hand in the East Districts, managed grain exports, ran his own chapel, smiled for photos, and handed out bread to orphans like it was holy work. But he was a snake. And with Ryland gone, Cole slithered into the power vacuum like he was born for it. He didn't declare war. He declared order. And the people, terrified of chaos, welcomed it. He rebranded Ryland's old supply routes as faith convoys, replaced soldiers with mission riders, and told every frightened town between here and the border that he'd bring back stability, as long as they stayed in line. We reached Red Hollow by the end of the week. A mining town, half dead from the last collapse. Dust in the air. Men without families. Children without names. They remembered me. Some by face. Some by reputation. Most by the scar down my neck from that winter skirmish near Black Ridge. They offered no beds. Only silence. But silence is safer than bullets. So we stayed. For a while. One morning, I saw June watching the children play by the riverbank. She didn't smile much, but when she did, it felt like something ancient thawed. I sat beside her and handed her a strip of dried apple. She took it, ate it slowly, then asked, "Why did you let me kill him?" I looked at the river, then said, "Because I'd already killed too much." She nodded, like she understood. But there was something else in her eyes, something heavy. "His people are looking for us," she said. I didn't ask how she knew. She just knew. By nightfall, the first riders came. Not to Red Hollow directly. They hit a camp 3 miles out, burned it to cinders. Left no bodies. Just signs. Symbols carved into the trees. A circle with a cross through it. Ray spat when he saw it. "Cole's mark," he muttered. "Sanctified vengeance. He's painting it holy now." We didn't wait to be next. We rode north, toward an old trading post I remembered from my cavalry days. No one used it anymore. Too remote. Too broken. But the walls still stood. And it gave us time to think. To plan. To decide what the hell we were even doing. Because it wasn't about running anymore. And it wasn't just about survival. It was about finishing what Ryland started. For good. That night, we sat around a low fire. 3 of us. No more, no less. I asked Ray what he remembered of Cole. He said, "Charmer. Wears God like a coat, puts it on when it's cold and tosses it when it's not. He doesn't want control, he wants worship." I nodded. That tracked. Then I asked June what she wanted. She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "I want a place where they don't call me property." That was it. That was enough. Because for her to have that, Cole had to fall. The plan was simple. Not easy, but simple. Cole was set to preach in a valley town 2 days from then. Preach and declare the new Protectorate Council. Which meant he'd be visible. Which meant he'd be vulnerable. We'd go. Not to snipe. Not to bomb. But to expose. To show his believers what he really was. A leech feeding on the corpse of a tyrant. We reached the valley early, dressed like travelers. No guns showing. No cause painted on our backs. Just 3 shadows in a crowd of the faithful. Cole arrived with banners. White robes. Gold trim. A choir singing behind him. He looked like a damn prophet. People cheered. Children laughed. And somewhere in that mess, I thought maybe this is how empires survive. Not through fear. Through hope twisted into chains. I waited until he started to speak. Waited until he called Ryland a fallen shepherd. Waited until he said he'd bring peace through sacred obedience. Then I stepped forward, raised a single hand, and said, "Tell them what you did to the Rose tribe." The whole crowd froze. You could hear wind between boots. Cole turned to me, calm but rigid. He said nothing, so I said more. "You raided their camps, sold their children. You tied scripture to shackles. Is that the word of God?" Someone near me gasped. Someone else murmured, "That's him, the man from Bluff." I kept going. "You wear holiness like armor, but your hands are bloodier than the man you served." Then June stepped forward, held out the knife. The same knife that killed Ryland. Steel stained. Stil real. And said, "This was justice. Yours is coming." Pandemonium. Some screamed. Some ran. Some reached for weapons. But the truth had already slipped through the cracks. Like water through stone. Cole shouted orders. But fewer listened. We didn't wait for the bullets. We fled east into the canyons. Chased by riders. Hunted by dogs. But no longer unknown. They knew who we were now. They knew we weren't ghosts. We were reckoning. And reckoning doesn't die easy. They didn't catch us that night. Not for lack of trying. We rode hard through the canyons, using every trick the land could offer: river bends, narrow ledges, even a collapsed mineshaft Ray remembered from his smuggling days. We weren't faster than them, but we knew how to vanish. And for a little while we did. But the world had already seen our faces, heard our words, watched as the knife that killed Ryland glinted in the firelight. We weren't rumors anymore. We were wanted. Posters appeared in every outpost town from Dust Creek to Arroyo's End. My face. June's silhouette. Ray's crooked hat. $1,000 for capture. $2,000 for proof of death. It didn't matter that Cole hadn't answered our accusations. Didn't matter that June had looked into the eyes of hundreds and called him a slaver in the language of truth. He controlled the paper, the rail, the food. And when a man controls what you eat and what you read, he doesn't need to argue. He just waits for hunger to make you forget. But some didn't forget. Some listened. Some remembered Ryland's boots crushing their land and saw Cole polishing them instead of burning them. It started small. A caravan refused to carry grain for the Holy Council. Then a preacher in Sage Hollow tore down Cole's portrait from his church wall. Then came the bold ones. A sheriff near Laramie lit his own jail on fire before he'd let it be used to hold enemies of faith. A gang of former riders started robbing Cole's tribute wagons and tossing the gold into rivers. The word rebellion wasn't spoken aloud yet, but it hung in the air. It had a scent now. Smoke, sweat, wildness. We traveled under moonlight, used the rivers as roads, hid in caves and under abandoned rail bridges. At night, I'd look at June sleeping by the coals and wonder, what future are we even running toward? Because justice is a storm, and storms don't leave gardens behind. Ray got shot in Timber Pass. 3 rounds in the leg from a bounty hunter who thought he was clever. He wasn't. We buried him in a dry gully with his boots on backward. Ray bit down on a belt and didn't scream. He said, "If I die here, toss me in a canyon. Let the hawks chew me." He didn't die. But after that, he walked with a stick, said it gave him character. Then came the fire in Bell's Crossing. Cole's riders burned it to the ground. A town of 200. Gone. They said it was housing traders. All it had was a school. I found a little girl among the ashes, eyes wide, arms clutched around a half-melted toy horse. She didn't cry. Just looked at me like I was the last page in a book no one finished reading. June gave her water. I gave her my coat. We left her with a healer 2 towns over. But he never forgot her face. She reminded me of something I didn't want to admit. Sometimes fire wins. 2 weeks passed. Then came a letter. No stamp. No seal. Just tied to a dead pigeon with a red ribbon. Ray opened it. Read it aloud. "We remember what you did. We remember the bluff. We remember the fire. We're ready. Give the word." Signed, Lanterns. I looked at June. She didn't blink, just nodded. The lanterns were real, and they were waiting. We made our way to their hideout through a trail so old, it didn't even exist on maps anymore. A ridge west of Longbridge. A place once used by freight smugglers and whiskey runners. Now it was a camp, a sanctuary, a forge. The rebellion had a heart now. They called themselves the Lanterns because they burned light into dark places. 50 of them to start. Half farmers, half deserters. A few lost tribesmen who hadn't bowed to Ryland and sure as hell wouldn't bow to Cole. All armed. All hungry. All tired of kneeling. We told them the plan. We weren't building an army. We were building a spark. We didn't need to fight every battle. Just light one that couldn't be put out. And we had one shot. Cole's council wasn't complete. He was still touring, still trying to gather town leaders, under one name, one law. His next stop? Grantham. A river city. Big enough to matter. Proud enough to fight back. If we could turn Grantham before Cole did, we'd have leverage. We'd have proof that this wasn't just vengeance. It was revolution. The lanterns split into cells. 5 riders per group. We taught them guerrilla moves, smoke signaling, how to read wind and rifle sounds. They weren't soldiers. They were better. They were free. And they had nothing left to lose. We reached Grantham 4 days ahead of Cole. Just enough time to plant roots. Talk to the innkeepers. The blacksmith. The mail runners. We told them everything. What Ryland had done. What Cole was doing now. What we'd seen in the valley. In the ashes. In the silence between headlines. Most didn't believe. But some did. Especially the ones with missing sons. Or burned barns. Or women who vanished on cleansing patrols. Then, a break. One of Cole's own riders came to us. Name was Elijah Graves. Said he'd ridden for Ryland once. Seen enough hanging trees to last 3 lifetimes. He didn't ask for forgiveness, just a roll. Said, "You want to beat Cole? Don't kill him. Disarm his voice." Elijah told us something we didn't know. Cole wasn't just riding into Grantham. He was bringing a recorder, one of the old steam-driven voice boxes, meant to broadcast his speech to nearby towns via telegraph wire. A new age of sermon, he called it. Perfect. Because now we knew what to sabotage. The night before his arrival, we crept into the old town hall, swapped wires, reversed relays. June carved our message into the transmission plate by hand. Ray stood watch, leaning on his cane like a prophet. By dawn, we were ghosts again. Cole came in with banners, gold carriages, gunmen in white hats. That same damn choir. He stood on the stage like a holy man reborn. People clapped. Some knelt. Then he spoke. And the message that went out across the wire was not his. It was ours. It said, "This man feeds on fear. This man sells salvation for silence. This man is not your God, he is your leash." 3 towns revolted that day. 2 riders defected. A food convoy vanished into the hills and never came back. Cole's empire, built on fear and fire, began to crack. We lit the spark. Now we had to survive long enough to watch it burn. The dawn came harsh and cold over the jagged ridges surrounding Grantham. The light sliced through the dusty windows of the old warehouse where we had gathered, casting long shadows over faces hardened by months of running, fighting, and hoping for something better. The lanterns were quiet, their eyes reflecting a determination that had been forged in the fires of loss and desperation. I stood at the center, the weight of everything pressing down on me. This wasn't just about taking down Harmon Cole anymore. It was about breaking the chains that had bound this land for generations. Chains made of fear, silence, and blood. The plan was brutal in its simplicity. Strike Cole's convoy before it reached the town center, cut off his communication lines, and send a message that would ignite the rebellion beyond Grantham's borders. There was no room for mistakes, no second chances. June stood beside me, her face pale but steady. The girl who had once been nothing but a scared, bruised shadow was now a force of storm gathering on the horizon. Her knife was sheathed at her side, but I knew she was ready to draw it if need be. Ray, limping on his stick, was already organizing the smaller groups, assigning tasks with the precision of a veteran general. The pain in his leg didn't slow him. If anything, it sharpened his focus. Hours passed as we moved through the narrow back streets, our boots barely making a sound on the gravel. The convoy was due at the river crossing just before noon. It was a routine route, heavily guarded but predictable. We split into teams. Some took the hills to cut off the escape, others moved to sabotage the wagons and horses. My group was tasked with intercepting the telegraph station, a small, ramshackle building where Cole's men maintained the wires that carried his voice to the far reaches of the territory. As we crept closer, I felt the old adrenaline surge, the same that had kept me alive when I was a soldier, the same that had fueled every moment since I'd taken up this fight. But this time, it wasn't just survival, it was justice. The guards at the telegraph station were fewer than expected, complacent from months of easy control. June slipped past the first two silently, her steps light as a cat. I followed, rifle ready, heart pounding in a rhythm that matched the distant clip-clop of the approaching convoy. Inside the station, Ray and two others were quietly working, disabling the equipment and cutting the wires. The soft hum of electricity faded under their hands. Suddenly, a shout came from outside. The convoy had arrived earlier than expected. We barely had time to react. June grabbed my arm, guiding me toward the back exit as sounds of urgency filled the air. We slipped into the alley, the atmosphere heavy with tension. The air was thick, filled with anticipation and unrest. The moment had come. The morning was cold and gray, dawn spreading slowly over the land. After months of struggle and uncertainty, we stood at the edge of everything. Grantham was waking up. The quiet hope had grown into something unstoppable. We had weakened Cole's grip, but the challenge was far from over. The man who once hid behind words of faith now depended on fear and force. He sent his followers to try and silence what we had begun. The final moment approached. I felt it in every bone, every breath shared among the lanterns, and in the steady calm of June beside me. Cole's men gathered on the ridge overlooking Grantham. The town held its breath, caught between fear and hope. Families prepared their homes. Shopkeepers whispered quietly. Children waited, sensing the change. We stayed in the shadows, fewer in number but filled with purpose. The lanterns moved with quiet determination, ready for what was to come. The air shifted. Commands were spoken sharply, and the world seemed to tilt. Suddenly, everything changed. I found myself surrounded by noise and motion, senses alert. The world shook, and people moved with urgency. The calm voice of the preacher was gone, replaced by hurried commands. June was fierce beside me, focused and unyielding. Each step she took broke away a bit of the darkness that had long followed her. Ray moved steadily, his resolve clear. His stick was steady, his presence strong. Even worn down, strength remained. Time stretched as the sun rose, casting harsh light on the town. Faces blurred, friends and strangers caught in the moment. The earth held the marks of our struggle. Cole appeared, surrounded by a small group. His eyes showed fear and desperation. No longer cloaked in power, he was a man grasping at fading control. "Stop this now," he pleaded. "I offer safety and peace." His words met silence. June stepped forward, her voice steady and clear. Safety built on fear is no safety at all. Peace bought with silence is no peace. She lifted her knife, a symbol of resistance, and held it high. The crowd responded, voices rising with courage. They fought not for wealth or land, but for life, for the future, for freedom. In the end, Cole's followers faltered. Their will broke. They withdrew. Cole was taken, held by those who once trusted him. Silence settled over the valley, a long-awaited calm. I looked around. Faces were weary but alive. June's hand rested on my shoulder. "We did it," she whispered. I nodded, feeling the weight of our victory. We had won a battle, but the journey toward healing would continue for years. That night, beneath the stars, we stood on Grantham's steps. The town was bruised but breathing. People gathered, lanterns glowing, voices weaving new beginnings. The fight wasn't about one man or one tyrant. It was about everyone who refused to look away. Every soul choosing hope over fear. Every hand raised in courage. The past remained, Memories of loss. The burden of choices made. But for the first time, I felt something I hadn't in years. Peace, not the silence of running, but the calm born from standing tall. June and I looked out over the crowd, two broken pieces made whole in the fires of rebellion. She smiled fierce, wild, alive. And I knew we had found more than freedom. We had found ourselves. The West would never be the same. And maybe, just maybe, that was how it was meant to be. This is not just a story of one man. It's a story of the many who rise when the world falls apart, and the light they kindle when darkness tries to claim the land. If you ever hear the sound of silence in the West again, know this. There are those who refuse to be quiet, those who fight, those who remember. And as long as they do, there will always be hope. I remember every second in fragments. The stinging crack of my rifle, the scream of a horse as it stumbled, the sharp scent of gunpowder mixed with sweat and blood. Men fell around me, some I barely saw, others I knew by face, faces marked by fear and greed. June was a whirlwind, moving like she had fire in her veins. Her knife found throats and ribs, swift and merciless. I caught sight of her once, eyes blazing, as she stood over a fallen rider, breathing heavy. Not a word spoken, but everything said. Ray took a bullet to the shoulder but kept fighting, his voice rising above the chaos, rallying those who wavered. The battle stretched on, brutal and unforgiving. At one point, I found myself face to face with a man wearing Cole's colors, a preacher turned executioner. He raised a pistol. Time slowed. I fired. He fell, eyes wide with surprise, and I didn't feel victory. Only the cold weight of what this all meant. This was more than a fight. This was the breaking of a world. Hours later, after the smoke cleared and the last shot echoed into silence, the convoy lay in ruins. Cole's men scattered or captured. The telegraph station was dark and dead. We had won the day. But the cost was written on every wound and every silent tear. As night fell, the townspeople gathered cautiously. Some were afraid. Others hopeful. The divide was clear, those who had lived under Cole's shadow and those who dared dream of light. I stood before them, not as a hero, but as a man who had been broken and remade. June stood beside me, her eyes scanning the crowd, fierce and steady. "We've taken the first step," I told them. "But this is just the beginning," the crowd murmured, some nodding, others unsure. One old woman stepped forward, wrinkled hands clenched tight. "If you want peace, you have to be ready to pay its price." And that price was coming. The next days were a whirlwind. Cole, wounded but alive, fled to regroup. His followers scattered like crows in a storm, but their hunger for power remained. The rebellion grew bolder. Towns began rising. People armed themselves not just with rifles but with hope. But with hope came sacrifice. Friends were lost. Trust was tested. And the past, the ghosts we thought we'd left behind, returned to remind us that nothing worth fighting for is ever easy. One cold night, I found June sitting alone by the river, staring into the dark water. She looked up as I approached, eyes tired but unyielding. "What's next?" she asked. I paused, then answered truthfully, "Whatever comes, we face it together. Because this fight, it's bigger than any one of us." She nodded, a small, fierce smile breaking through the weariness. And for the first time in a long time, I believed her. The war for the West was far from over, but the silence was broken. The chains were cracking, and we had lit a fire that would burn long after we were gone. If you were in their shoes, would you fight the same fight? Let us know your thoughts down in the comments. And don't forget to hit that like button. While you're here, explore the other videos on screen. There are more stories waiting to grab you.